Picture this scenario for just a moment. You're standing at the altar, about to marry the person you love more than anything in the world. The room is small, the decorations are modest. There's no music, no fanfare, nothing but the bare essentials. And then, out of nowhere, one of the most famous voices in American history walks through the door and refuses to leave until he's made your day unforgettable. Sound impossible? Well, it happened, and the couple it happened to kept it a secret for half a century. This is the true story of June 12, 1972, the night Dean Martin did something so unexpected, so completely out of character for a megastar, that even the people who witnessed it didn't believe it was real. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. The consequences of that single act of kindness didn't stop with one magical wedding ceremony. They rippled forward through time, touching 3 entire generations and changing the lives of hundreds of people who never even met the man. By the end of this story, you'll understand why one grandson stood up at his grandparents' 50th anniversary party and said 7 words that made an entire room fall silent. Now I finally know where it all came from. Let's transport ourselves back to a Tuesday evening in Las Vegas. The year is 1972, and the Sands Hotel is the epicenter of everything glamorous and exciting about Sin City. Slot machines are ringing, cigarette smoke curls toward the ceiling, women in evening gowns glide across marble floors, while men in perfectly tailored suits sip cocktails and place bets they can barely afford. Up on the main stage, Dean Martin is preparing to deliver his second performance of the evening. He's 55 years old and at the absolute pinnacle of his fame. Every seat in the house is sold out. 3,000 people have paid premium prices just to see him croon, joke, and sip what everyone assumes is whiskey, but is actually apple juice. Dean Martin in 1972 wasn't just a singer, he was an institution. He was cool personified. He was the man every guy wanted to be and every woman wanted to be with. His career had spanned decades. His friendship with Frank Sinatra had made him royalty in the entertainment world. And on this particular night, he had every reason to simply go through his usual routine, perform, rest, perform again, collect his paycheck, and go home. But something was about to interrupt that routine. Something small. Something most people would have walked right past without noticing. While Dean Martin was preparing for his evening shows, 3 floors above the main casino, in a chapel so small it barely qualified as a room, 2 young people were about to exchange vows that would mean everything to them and nothing to anyone else. Their names were Thomas and Catherine Reynolds. He was 24, she was 22. They'd scraped together every dollar they could find just to afford this moment. Thomas worked construction in Ohio. His hands were calloused from years of physical labor. His suit didn't fit quite right because it belonged to a coworker who'd loaned it to him for the occasion. His parents had died when he was young, and his only brother was serving in the military overseas. He had no family present for the most important day of his life. Catherine was an elementary school teacher with dreams that far exceeded her salary. Her wedding dress was simple, bought off the rack at a department store. It wasn't the dress she'd imagined wearing as a little girl, but it was the dress she could afford. Her sister Mary had driven 12 hours from Ohio to witness the ceremony. That was it. That was the entire guest list. They had $300 to their name total. Half of that went to renting the chapel for exactly 1 hour. There would be no reception, no band, no photographer, except for Mary's cheap camera, no flower arrangements, beyond a handful of daisies that cost $3 at a gas station on the way to the hotel. The justice of the peace, who would marry them, was already tired. This was his 7th wedding of the day. He'd performed so many ceremonies at the Sands that he'd memorized the words and could recite them without feeling. To him, Thomas and Catherine were just another couple in a long line of couples. He'd forget their names before the hour was over. This was supposed to be quick, efficient, and forgettable. Get married, sign the papers, take a photo, leave. That was the plan. Dean Martin had finished his first show at 7 o'clock. He had 2 hours before his next performance, and usually he'd spend that time in his private dressing room, maybe taking a quick nap or playing cards with his band members. But that night, Dean felt restless. Something pulled him out of his usual routine. He decided to wander through the hotel, to walk among the regular people, the gamblers and tourists who probably wouldn't even recognize him if he kept his head down. He liked these moments. They reminded him of who he was before the fame. Before he became Dean Martin, he'd been Dino Crossetti, a kid from Steubenville, Ohio, who worked as a blackjack dealer and dreamed of something bigger. Walking through crowds anonymously brought him back to those days when he was just another face in the crowd. As he moved through the casino floor, something caught his eye near the elevators. A young woman in a white dress, crying, not tears of joy. These were different. These were the tears of someone disappointed, someone who'd hoped for more but learned to accept less. Next to her stood a young man in an obviously borrowed suit. He was holding her, trying to comfort her, but he looked just as crushed as she did. Dean stopped walking. He watched them for a long moment. The woman wiped her eyes with a tissue. The man pulled her closer and whispered something. And then Dean heard it. Just a fragment of conversation, but it hit him with unexpected force. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I know you wanted to give me more. I know you wanted music and dancing and something beautiful, but this is enough. You're enough." In that moment, Dean Martin made a choice that would become the most important thing he'd do that day. More important than his sold-out shows. More important than any recording session or movie deal. He walked directly toward the couple. Thomas and Catherine looked up, startled by the approaching stranger. At first, they didn't recognize him. Their minds were too consumed with their own disappointment. But when he spoke, that voice was unmistakable, smooth as silk and warm as summer. "Excuse me, folks, I couldn't help but notice you two look like you're heading somewhere important." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with recognition. "Oh my God, Tommy, that's—" Thomas stammered, suddenly embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment by someone so famous. "Mr. Martin, we're so sorry if we're blocking your way." Dean smiled that legendary smile of his, the one that had charmed millions. "You're not blocking anything, pal. Actually, I think I might be the one interrupting something special. Am I right in thinking you two are about to get married?" Catherine nodded, still in shock that Dean Martin was standing 3 feet away from her, talking to her like they were old friends. "Yes, sir. In about 15 minutes. There's a chapel upstairs." Dean looked at her simple dress. He looked at Thomas's borrowed suit. He glanced at Mary, standing awkwardly behind them, clutching those cheap daisies like they were made of gold. "And let me take a wild guess here," Dean said, his voice gentle and understanding. "You're doing this without all the fancy extras. No band, no singer, just you two and the love you've got for each other." Thomas felt heat rise to his face. He was embarrassed, but he wasn't ashamed. "We don't have much money, Mr. Martin, but we have each other, and honestly, that's all we need." Dean put his hand on Thomas's shoulder. The touch was firm, genuine, the kind of gesture that comes from real respect. "You know something, kid. You're absolutely right. That is all you need. But here's the thing." He paused, looking between them both. "I grew up with nothing. I understand what it's like to want to give someone the entire world, but only have pennies in your pocket. And I also learned something along the way. Sometimes, when you least expect it, a little bit of magic shows up. You just have to be willing to let it in." Catherine was crying again, but these tears were different. "Mr. Martin, are you saying—" Dean interrupted with a wink. "I'm saying I've got about 90 minutes before I need to be on stage, and I can't think of a better way to spend that time than making sure you two have a wedding worth remembering. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to sing at your ceremony." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas couldn't find words. Catherine covered her face with both hands. Mary dropped the bouquet on the floor. "You Ifshiko, you want to sing at our wedding?" Thomas finally managed to ask. "I don't just want to," Dean said. "I need to. Trust me on this. Now come on, we've got a chapel waiting, and I've got a song that needs singing." Inside the chapel, what happened next became the kind of story people tell but don't quite believe. Dean Martin, one of the biggest entertainment icons on the planet, walked into that tiny chapel on the 3rd floor of the Sands Hotel. The justice of the peace nearly collapsed when he saw who'd just entered. Dean didn't ask permission. He didn't make any grand announcements. He simply positioned himself near the altar, nodded at Thomas and Catherine, and said, "All right, let's get you two married." The ceremony began. The justice of the peace fumbled through his lines, clearly rattled by the presence of a legend, standing 3 feet away. Thomas held Catherine's trembling hands in his own trembling hands. Mary sat in the front row with tears already streaming down her cheeks, unable to process what was happening. And then came the moment that would echo through 5 decades. When the justice of the peace said those 4 magic words, "You may kiss the bride," Dean Martin began to sing. No microphone, no band, no backup singers or orchestration, just his voice, pure and powerful, filling every corner of that small room. He sang "Everybody Loves Somebody." The acoustics of that intimate space transformed his voice into something transcendent. Every note was filled with warmth, with genuine emotion, with the kind of sincerity that can't be faked or performed. It didn't sound like entertainment. It sounded like a blessing. Catherine buried her face in Thomas's chest and sobbed. Thomas held her with tears running down his own face. Mary was openly weeping. Even the justice of the peace had to wipe his eyes with his sleeve. When the final note faded, Dean walked over to the newlyweds and shook Thomas's hand firmly. "Congratulations, Mr. Reynolds. You take care of this lady. She's something special." Then he turned to Catherine and kissed her hand like a gentleman from another era. "And you, Mrs. Reynolds, you've got yourself a good man here. I can tell. You two are going to have a beautiful life together." Catherine found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Martin, I don't know how to thank you." Dean smiled. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. Just love each other. That's all the thanks I need." Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He pressed it into Thomas's hand. "Go have a proper dinner tonight. Somewhere nice. On me." Thomas tried to refuse. "Mr. Martin, we can't accept this." "Yes, you can," Dean said firmly but kindly, "and you will. Now go enjoy your wedding night. You've earned it." Dean Martin walked out of that chapel as quietly as he'd entered. He returned to his dressing room, prepared for his 9 o'clock show, and never mentioned the incident to anyone on his team. He didn't call the press. He didn't use it for publicity. He didn't tell the story on talk shows or in interviews. He simply did it because in that moment, it felt like exactly the right thing to do. Thomas and Catherine left the Sands Hotel that night in a state of disbelief. They used that $100 bill to have dinner at the hotel's finest restaurant, a place they never could have afforded otherwise. They ordered champagne and steak. They talked about what had just happened, replaying every word, every note, every impossible moment. "Do you think anyone will actually believe us when we tell them?" Catherine asked. Thomas laughed.